She knew she shouldn't sign it, but desperation makes people do impossible things. Callie Rose Whitmore sat in the sterile conference room, her green-gray eyes scanning the contract for the third time. The numbers seemed surreal. More money than she'd seen in her entire 27 years of drifting from state to state. Her copper-blonde hair was pulled back in its usual practical ponytail, and she unconsciously tugged at a loose strand when nervous thoughts crept in. "This is really happening," she whispered to herself, her subtle Texas drawl becoming more pronounced as anxiety built in her chest. Across the mahogany table sat Silas James Montgomery, and everything about him screamed old money and control. At 39, he commanded the room without saying a word. His tailored charcoal suit fit his athletic frame perfectly, and his steel-gray eyes seemed to read every thought crossing her face. His dark hair, touched with silver at the temples, and his perfectly groomed beard gave him an intimidating sophistication that made Callie want to run. But she couldn't run, not this time. "Miss Whitmore," his voice was deep, measured. "I need to be clear about expectations. This isn't just a financial transaction. The health of my child is paramount." Callie's fingers drummed against the leather portfolio containing her medical records. All clean, all perfect for what he needed. She'd been working double shifts at a truck stop diner in Nevada when the opportunity found her through a discreet agency, a surrogate for a billionaire, anonymous, professional, life-changing money. She hadn't expected him to be this magnetic, intense, the kind of man who made her hyper-aware of her worn jeans and simple cotton t-shirt. "I understand, Mr. Montgomery," she replied, forcing her voice to stay steady. "I've read every page. No alcohol, no smoking, premium healthcare, regular checkups, I can handle that." What she didn't say was that she'd been handling much worse her entire adult life. Since losing her family in that Texas highway accident 8 years ago, she'd become an expert at handling whatever life threw at her, alone. Silas leaned forward slightly, and she caught the subtle scent of his expensive cologne mixed with something warmer, more personal. "There's one more thing," he said, sliding another document across the table. "Given your transient lifestyle, I'll need you to remain in California for the duration of the pregnancy." Callie's hand froze halfway to the paper. Stay in one place for 9 months? Her entire survival strategy was built on never staying anywhere long enough to form attachments, never long enough to get hurt again. "I have arrangements to make," she said carefully, her accent thickening despite her efforts to control it. "Of course. I'll cover all relocation expenses, plus a comfortable apartment in Napa Valley, close to the best medical facilities." His gray-blue eyes studied her reaction. "Is that acceptable?" Acceptable. The man was offering her more stability than she'd known since her teenage years, but stability terrified her more than poverty ever had. She thought about the stack of unpaid bills in her truck, the engine that needed repair, the constant weight of having nothing and no one. Then she looked at Silas Montgomery, successful, controlled, completely out of her league, and realized this might be her only chance to finally disappear forever with enough money to start over anywhere she wanted. "Where do I sign?" she asked, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. As Silas handed her his expensive pen, their fingers brushed for just a moment. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her, and she noticed how his eyes flickered, with something that looked almost vulnerable. Neither of them realized that signing their names on that contract would be the easy part. The hard part would be pretending that what grew between them was just business. 3 weeks later, Callie discovered that some things in life refuse to follow even the most carefully written contracts. "High risk?" she repeated, staring at Dr. Elena Maria Santos across the pristine medical office. The words felt foreign in her mouth, like a language she'd never learned to speak. Dr. Santos, a warm-eyed woman in her 40s with graying dark hair pulled into a professional bun, nodded with the kind of gentle authority that came from years of delivering difficult news. "Your blood pressure is elevated, and given your medical history, the trauma, the stress patterns, we need to monitor this pregnancy very closely." Callie's hand instinctively moved to her still flat stomach. In the 3 weeks since signing Silas's contract, She'd barely had time to process that she was actually pregnant. The morning sickness had been brutal, but she'd powered through it. Like everything else in her life, alone, quietly, without complaint. "What does that mean exactly?" she asked, her Texas accent creeping in despite her efforts to sound composed. "It means," came a familiar deep voice from the doorway, "that we need to revise our arrangement." Silas Montgomery stepped into the room, looking every inch the concerned. What was he exactly? Not the father, not in any real sense. But the way his gray-blue eyes immediately found hers. The way his usually perfect composure cracked just slightly around the edges suggested something more complicated than a simple business transaction. He'd clearly come straight from his office, his navy suit immaculate, his beard precisely trimmed, his expensive watch catching the afternoon light. But Callie noticed the small details, how he rolled his shoulders like he'd been carrying tension all day, how his fingers briefly touched his temple as if fighting off a headache. "Mr. Montgomery," Dr. Santos acknowledged with professional warmth, "I was just explaining to Miss Whitmore that we'll need more intensive monitoring." "Whatever she needs," Silas said immediately, his gaze still fixed on Callie. "Cost isn't a factor." Callie shifted uncomfortably in her chair, suddenly hyper-aware of her practical outfit. Dark jeans, a soft gray sweater, her worn leather jacket draped over the chair. She felt like an imposter in this gleaming medical facility where everything screamed money and careful planning. "The thing is," Dr. Santos continued, switching seamlessly into Spanish-accented English as she addressed them both, "Mija, you're going to need more support than living alone in an apartment can provide. Bed rest periods, medication schedules, immediate access to medical care." "I can handle it," Callie said quickly, the automatic response of someone who'd been handling everything alone for 8 years. "I don't need—" "You'll stay at the house," Silas interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "In Napa, I have a full household staff and we can arrange for round-the-clock medical supervision." The room fell silent. Callie felt her heart rate spike, not from the pregnancy complications but from pure panic. Live in his house? With him? That wasn't part of the deal. The deal was supposed to be clean, distant, professional. "Mr. Montgomery," she began, but he held up a hand. "This isn't negotiable, Miss Whitmore. The health of my child comes first." His voice softened almost imperceptibly. "And frankly, your health matters too." Dr. Santos watched this exchange with the knowing eyes of someone who'd seen many complicated family dynamics play out in her office. "It would be the safest option," she agreed gently. "At least until we see how you respond to treatment." Callie looked between them, feeling trapped and terrified. She'd spent years perfecting the art of not depending on anyone, not staying anywhere long enough to need rescue. Now she was being asked to move into the home of a man who already made her feel things she had no business feeling. "For how long?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "However long it takes," Silas replied, and something in his tone made her look up sharply. His gray eyes held an intensity she couldn't quite read. "I won't take chances with this. Pregnancy, Callie." It was the first time he'd used her first name, and the sound of it in his deep, controlled voice did something strange to her pulse that had nothing to do with medical complications. Dr. Santos smiled, recognizing something the two of them hadn't yet acknowledged. "I think this arrangement will be good for everyone involved," she said warmly. "Sometimes the best medicine isn't found in a prescription bottle." As they scheduled the next appointment and discussed logistics, Callie found herself stealing glances at Silas. The way he listened intently to every medical detail, the way his jaw tightened when Dr. Santos mentioned potential complications, the way he seemed to be fighting some internal battle between professional distance and something much more personal. Walking out to the parking lot, Callie paused beside her beat-up truck while Silas approached his sleek black sedan. "This changes things," she said, more to herself than to him. He stopped, turned back to face her. For a moment, his carefully maintained composure slipped, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression. "Yes, he agreed quietly. It does. Neither of them was prepared for just how much everything was about to change. Some homes welcome you with warmth. Others challenge everything you thought you knew about yourself. Callie stood at the end of the winding driveway, her single duffel bag slung over her shoulder, staring up at what could only be described as a modern masterpiece. Silas Montgomery's Napa Valley estate sprawled before her like something from an architectural magazine. All clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, and understated elegance that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime. Her beat-up truck looked absurdly out of place parked beside the perfectly manicured landscaping, like a Mustang that had wandered into a thoroughbred stable. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, her Texas drawl thick with nerves. "It's just temporary. High-risk pregnancy, doctor's orders, nothing more." But as she approached the massive front door, her practical mind cataloged escape routes. Something she'd done instinctively since she was 19 and learned that everything you love can disappear in an instant. The door opened before she could knock. "Miss Whitmore." Silas appeared in the doorway, and Callie's breath caught slightly. Gone was the intimidating businessman from the medical office. He wore dark jeans that fit him perfectly, and a soft gray Henley that somehow made his gray-blue eyes even more striking. His beard was still immaculately groomed, but something about seeing him in casual clothes made him seem more human, more dangerous to her carefully guarded heart. "Mr. Montgomery," she replied, shifting her weight nervously. I'm here." "Silas," he corrected, stepping aside to let her enter. "I think we can drop the formalities considering the circumstances." Callie stepped into the foyer and felt immediately out of place. Everything was beautiful, expensive, carefully curated. The opposite of her nomadic life of truck stops and cheap motels. She tugged at her practical ponytail, a nervous habit she'd never been able to shake. "Maria will show you to your room," Silas continued, gesturing toward an older Latina woman approaching with a warm smile. "She manages the household. Anything you need, just ask her." Maria looked to be in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back simply. She wore comfortable clothes that suggested she was more family than staff. "Bienvenida, mija," she said warmly, her accent musical. "We're so happy to have you here." Callie felt an unexpected tightness in her throat. When was the last time someone had genuinely welcomed her anywhere? "Thank you," she managed, following Maria toward a sweeping staircase. "Your room overlooks the vineyard," Maria explained as they climbed. "Mr. Silas, he chose it special. Said you might like the view, see? Very peaceful." Callie glanced back to find Silas watching them ascend, his expression unreadable. When their eyes met, he quickly looked away, running a hand along his bearded jaw, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as his tell when he was thinking too hard about something. The guest room was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased rolling. Hills covered in neat rows of grapevines, and the late afternoon sun painted everything in golden light. The furniture was elegant but comfortable, and someone had placed fresh flowers on the nightstand. "El Señor, he wanted to make sure you were comfortable," Maria said, watching Callie take in the space. "There are clothes in the closet. Soft things, good for pregnancy. And the bathroom, it has a soaking tub for when your back hurts." Callie turned sharply. "He bought me clothes?" Maria's smile was knowing. "Sí, mija. He spent much time choosing. Said they should be comfortable, but beautiful, like you deserve beautiful things." Heat crept up Callie's neck. In 8 years of drifting, no one had bought her anything, let alone clothes chosen with care. It felt too intimate, too thoughtful for what was supposed to be a business arrangement. I should go thank him," Callie said, though every instinct told her to run. She found Silas in what appeared to be his study, standing with his back to the door, staring out at the vineyard. He'd rolled up his sleeves, and she noticed how his shoulders carried tension even in the comfort of his own home. "Silas?" His name felt strange on her tongue, too familiar. He turned, and for a moment something vulnerable flickered across his features before his composed mask slipped back into place. "Are you settling in all right?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. The room is beautiful. And the clothes, you didn't have to do that. Dr. Santos mentioned that comfort would be important. He paused, then added more quietly, "When was the last time someone took care of you, Callie?" The question hit her like a physical blow. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling exposed in this beautiful room with this complicated man who saw too much. "I take care of myself," she said, her accent thickening defensively. "That's not what I asked." They stared at each other across the elegant space, and Callie felt something shift between them. This wasn't the sterile conference room where they'd signed contracts. This was his home, his sanctuary, and he'd invited her into it. More than that, he'd prepared, for her, chosen clothes for her, thought about her comfort in ways that had nothing to do with the baby she was carrying. "I should let you get back to work," she said, backing toward the door. "Callie." Her name stopped her. "Dinner's at 7. Maria's making tamales. She insists it's good for pregnancy cravings." Despite herself, Callie smiled. Tamales sound perfect. As she headed back to her room, she caught her reflection in a hallway mirror. For the first time in years, she looked hopeful. And that terrified her more than any contract ever could, because hope meant having something to lose. Sometimes the most dangerous moments are the quiet ones, when your guard is down and your heart forgets to protect itself. 3 weeks into living at the estate, Callie had developed an unexpected routine that felt dangerously close to belonging. She woke each morning to the sight of mist rolling across the vineyard, had breakfast in the sun-drenched kitchen while Maria hummed old Mexican songs and spent afternoons reading in the library that smelled of leather and old books. But it was the evenings that undid her completely. "You don't have to cook for me," Callie said, padding into the kitchen in bare feet and one of the soft cardigans Silas had somehow known she'd love. Her copper blonde hair was loose around her shoulders for once, and she'd stopped fighting the urge to leave it down when she was comfortable. Silas looked up from where he stood at the stove, sleeves rolled up, his usual business attire replaced by dark jeans and a simple white button-down. No tie, no jacket. Just a man making dinner in his own kitchen. The sight did something to her chest that she refused to examine too closely. "Maria has the evening off," he said simply, stirring, something that smelled incredible. "And you need to eat. I can make myself a sandwich." "When was the last time you had a proper meal that you didn't have to cook yourself?" He glanced over his shoulder, those gray-blue eyes holding hers. "Besides, I enjoy cooking. It's meditative." Callie settled onto one of the kitchen stools, watching him move with surprising grace around the space. His beard was slightly less perfect than usual, as if he'd been running his hands through it, a nervous habit she'd noticed during their medical appointments. "You're full of surprises, Silas Montgomery," she murmured, her Texas accent soft in the intimate lighting. "Am I?" He plated the pasta with careful precision, then set it in front of her. Their fingers brushed as he handed her a fork, and neither of them pulled away immediately. The food was incredible, some kind of seafood linguine that tasted like it belonged in a 5-star restaurant. But more than that, it was made with care, for her. "This is amazing," she said, and meant it. "My ex-wife taught me." The words came out quietly, almost without his permission. "Sarah always said that food made with love tastes different." Callie's fork paused halfway to her mouth. In all their conversations, he'd never mentioned his late wife directly. The pain in his voice was carefully controlled but unmistakable. "She sounds like she was special," Callie said gently. Silas was quiet for a long moment, his own food forgotten. She was. They both were. He looked up, his eyes holding a grief that made Callie's chest ache. James would have been 6 this month. The simple statement hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. Callie set down her fork, every instinct telling her to flee from this kind of raw honesty. But something stronger kept her rooted to the spot. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and the words carried the weight of her own losses. "Some days are harder than others." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Cooking helps. Focusing on something immediate. tangible. He gestured around the kitchen. This house used to feel like a mausoleum. Now, his eyes found hers again, and this time she saw something that made her pulse quicken. Now it feels alive, again. The admission hung between them, loaded with implications that neither was ready to voice. Callie felt her careful walls cracking, felt the dangerous warmth of being seen, truly seen by someone who understood loss. "I should," she began, starting to stand. "Stay." The word came out rougher than he intended. "Please. I don't like eating alone anymore." So she stayed. They talked about small things. The vineyard, Maria's stories about her grandchildren, the book Callie was reading. Safe topics that couldn't hurt either of them. But underneath the careful conversation, something else was building. When Callie yawned, Silas immediately noticed. "You should rest. Dr. Santos said sleep is crucial right now." "I know, She hesitated, then admitted, "I'm not used to going to bed early. On the road you sleep when you can, not when you should." "And before the road?" he asked quietly. "What was sleep like when you had a home?" The question caught her off guard. "Safe," she answered before she could stop herself. "When I was little, my mama would make warm milk with honey, and my daddy would check all the locks twice. I felt protected. You deserve to feel that way again." The simple statement undid something fundamental in her chest. When was the last time someone had thought about what she deserved, rather than what she could provide? "Good night, Silas," she whispered, fleeing before she could do something foolish like believe she could have this kind of care permanently. But as she lay in the beautiful room he'd chosen for her, wearing the soft nightgown he'd somehow known she'd prefer, Callie realized that the most dangerous thing wasn't falling for Silas Montgomery. The most dangerous thing was starting to believe she deserved the way he looked at her, like she was precious, like she was worth protecting, like she was worth staying for. The first ultrasound appointment would change everything. They just didn't know it yet. "Are you nervous?" Dr. Elena Santos asked, preparing the ultrasound equipment in her warm, familiar office. Her kind brown eyes moved between Callie and Silas, noting the subtle changes in their dynamic since the last visit. Callie lay on the examination table, her soft cotton dress, one of the many Silas had thoughtfully chosen, pushed up slightly to expose her still small bump. At 12 weeks, the pregnancy was finally showing, a gentle curve that made everything feel suddenly, startlingly real. "A little," Callie admitted, her Texas accent barely noticeable now, except when she was truly relaxed. She'd noticed that happening more lately, the softening of her defensive edges when Silas was around. Silas sat in the chair beside the table, closer than he'd been at previous appointments. He'd removed his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves, a small concession to informality that Dr. Santos recognized as significant. His gray-blue eyes were fixed on the monitor with an intensity that made something flutter in Callie's chest. "Let's see how our little one is doing," Dr. Santos said warmly, applying the cool gel to Callie's skin. The moment the heartbeat filled, the room, strong, steady, undeniably alive, everything shifted. Silas's breath caught audibly. His hand, which had been resting on the arm of his chair, moved instinctively toward Callie before he caught himself. But she saw the gesture, felt the pull of it, and without thinking she reached out. Their fingers intertwined naturally, like they'd done it 1,000 times before. "Oh my," Dr. Santos murmured, adjusting the wand. "Would you like to know the sex?" "Yes," they said simultaneously, then looked at each other in surprise. "It's a girl," Dr. Santos announced, her voice warm with joy. "A healthy, beautiful little girl." The silence that followed was charged with emotion. Callie felt tears she hadn't expected sliding down her cheeks, and when she looked at Silas, his composed mask had completely fallen away. His eyes were bright, with unshed tears, his free hand pressed to his mouth as if holding back words too dangerous to speak. "A daughter," he whispered. And the word carried the weight of every dream he'd thought he'd lost. She's perfect, Callie breathed, staring at the tiny form on the screen. This wasn't supposed to feel personal. This was supposed to be a transaction. But looking at their joined hands, feeling the way Silas's thumb traced gentle circles over her knuckles, she realized they'd crossed a line neither had meant to cross. Dr. Santos printed several pictures, tactfully giving them a moment to process. When she handed the images to Silas, he studied them with the reverence of a man seeing a miracle. James would have loved having a little sister, he said softly, then looked startled that he'd spoken the words aloud. Tell me about him, Callie said gently, still holding his hand. Silas was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then slowly he began to speak. He was fearless, always climbing things he shouldn't, always asking why about everything. Sarah used to say he got that from me. His voice grew softer. He wanted to be an astronaut and a chef and a dog trainer all at the same time. Said there was no point in picking just one dream. He sounds wonderful. He was. Silas looked at the ultrasound pictures again. I used to think, after they died, I thought maybe it was better that I couldn't have this again. Couldn't risk loving someone that much and losing them. And now? The question slipped out before Callie could stop it. Silas met her eyes, and what she saw there made her pulse stutter. Now I'm terrified that I already do. The admission hung between them like a confession neither was ready for. Dr. Santos chose that moment to return, breaking the spell but not erasing what had just passed between them. Everything looks perfect, she announced. But I want to see you both back in 2 weeks. The high-risk status means we monitor closely. As they left the office, walking toward their respective cars, Callie felt the weight of what had just happened. The ultrasound pictures were tucked safely in her purse, but it was the memory of Silas's hand in hers, the way he'd looked at their daughter on the screen, that she couldn't shake. Callie. She turned to find him standing by his car, uncertainty written across his features. Would you like to have dinner out tonight? To celebrate? It was such a simple question, but they both understood what he was really asking. Are we going to acknowledge what's happening between us? Are we going to stop pretending this is just business? She should say no. She should maintain the boundaries that kept her safe. But as she looked at this man who'd given her shelter and care and was now offering her something that looked dangerously like a real relationship, all her carefully constructed defenses crumbled. I'd like that, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. As she drove back to the estate, to his home, to what was starting to feel like their home, Callie realized that somewhere between the first ultrasound and this moment, she'd stopped planning her escape, and that terrified her more than anything ever had. Some evenings change everything. This was one of them. Callie stood in front of the full-length mirror in her room, second-guessing every choice she'd made. The dress she'd chosen from the careful selection Silas had provided was simple, but elegant. A soft navy blue that brought out her green-gray eyes and accommodated her growing bump without making her feel self-conscious. Her copper blonde hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders, and for the first time in years she'd bothered with makeup. You look beautiful, mija, Maria said from the doorway, her warm smile radiating approval. El Señor, he's going to forget how to breathe. It's just dinner, Callie protested, but her Texas accent was barely there, a sure sign she was more relaxed than she wanted to admit. See, just dinner, Maria agreed with knowing eyes. Like the sun is just light, and the ocean is just water. Downstairs, Silas checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. He'd changed clothes twice, finally settling on dark slacks and a charcoal button-down with no tie. Formal enough for the restaurant he'd chosen, casual enough not to intimidate Callie. His beard was perfectly groomed, but he kept running, his hand along his jaw, a nervous habit he couldn't seem to shake. The sound of heels on the stairs made him look up, and when he saw Callie descending, everything else faded away. You look, he began, then stopped, seemingly at a loss for words. Like I'm trying too hard? She asked, suddenly self-conscious. Like you're perfect, he said simply, and the honesty in his voice made her cheeks flush pink. The restaurant was intimate without being overwhelming. a small Italian place tucked into Napa's historic district, with soft lighting and the kind of atmosphere that encouraged long conversations. Silas had clearly chosen it carefully, someplace special, but not intimidating. "This is lovely," Callie said as they were seated at a corner table with a view of the vine-covered hills. "I hoped you'd like it." Silas seemed more nervous than she'd ever seen him, fidgeting with his napkin. "I haven't. It's been a long time since I've done this." "Taken a pregnant woman to dinner?" she teased gently. "Taken anyone to dinner?" he corrected, his gray-blue eyes meeting hers. "Not since Sarah." The admission hung between them, heavy with meaning. This wasn't just dinner. It was Silas stepping back into the world of the living, and he was choosing to do it with her. "What was she like?" Callie asked softly. "Really like, I mean. Not just the perfect memory version." Silas smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. She was terrible at cooking but insisted on trying. Burned water somehow. She talked to plants and genuinely believed they talked back, and she had this laugh. He paused, his expression growing distant. She could find joy in the smallest things. A good cup of coffee, a perfect sunset, James taking his first steps. "She sounds wonderful." She was, but she was also stubborn, as hell left wet towels everywhere, and had a weakness for terrible romantic comedies that she'd make me watch. His voice grew softer. I think she'd like you. She always said I needed someone who wouldn't let me take myself too seriously." Callie felt something shift in her chest. Not jealousy, but something deeper. Understanding, maybe. "I don't think I'm that person, Silas. I don't really know how to be light and joyful." "You sell yourself short." He reached across the table, his fingers finding hers. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" She shook her head, afraid to speak. Strength, grace under pressure. Someone who's survived things that would break most people and still has enough compassion left to worry about a stranger's feelings. His thumb traced over her knuckles. "And sometimes, when you think no one's looking, I see joy. Real joy. Like when Maria tells her stories about her grandchildren, or when you're reading in the garden and think you're alone." Tears pricked at Callie's eyes. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "How to be with someone. How to stay." "Neither do I," he admitted. "But maybe we can figure it out together." The waiter appeared then, and they ordered their meals with the easy coordination of two people learning to be in sync. As they ate, the conversation flowed naturally. Callie telling him about her childhood in Texas, the good memories from before the accident, and Silas sharing stories about building his company, his dreams for sustainable technology. "What about after?" Callie asked during dessert, her hand unconsciously resting on her bump. "After the baby comes? What happens to this?" It was the question neither had wanted to voice, but it hung over them like a shadow. Silas was quiet for a long moment, his fingers still intertwined with hers. "What do you want to happen?" "I don't know," she said honestly. 6 months ago, if someone told me I'd be sitting in a fancy restaurant in Napa Valley, holding hands with a billionaire and carrying his baby, I'd have laughed. None of this was supposed to be real. But it is real. His voice was soft, but certain. "What we're feeling, what's growing between us, it's real, Callie. The question is whether we're brave enough to see where it leads." As they drove home through the quiet Napa evening, Callie stared out at the moonlit vineyards and realized that for the first time in 8 years, she was thinking about the future in terms of we instead of I, and that scared her almost, as much as it thrilled her. Standing on the front steps of the estate, Silas turned to face her. "Thank you for tonight, for giving us, a chance." "Thank you for seeing me," she replied softly. "Really seeing me?" When he leaned down to kiss her cheek, the touch was gentle, respectful but loaded with promise. As Callie watched him unlock the front door, she realized that somewhere between the ultrasound and this moment, She'd stopped thinking of this place as temporary shelter. She'd started thinking of it as home. At 3 a.m., when the world is quiet and defenses are down, the heart reveals its deepest truths. Callie woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside her room. Not the quiet padding of Maria's house slippers, or the confident stride of Silas heading to his morning run. These were restless, uneven steps that spoke of sleeplessness and pain. She lay still for a moment, her hand instinctively moving, to rest on her growing bump. At 16 weeks, their daughter was becoming more real every day, her movements like gentle butterfly wings against Callie's ribs. But tonight something felt different. Wrong. Another sound drifted through the walls. A soft thud, like someone sitting heavily in a chair, followed by a sound that made Callie's chest tighten with recognition. Silas was crying. She'd heard that particular quality of grief before, in her own voice during those first terrible months after losing her family. The kind of crying that comes from the deepest places, when loss hits you like a wave in the darkness and there's no one around to pretend for. Without thinking, Callie slipped out of bed. She pulled on the soft robe Silas had somehow known she'd love, cashmere in a pale blue that brought out her eyes, and padded barefoot down the hallway toward the sound. She found him in the kitchen, sitting at the marble island with his head in his hands. He'd obviously been trying to make tea. A mug sat abandoned beside the kettle, steam rising untouched. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and he wore only pajama pants and a t-shirt that revealed the athletic build he kept hidden under his suits. "Silas?" she whispered, her Texas accent soft in the intimate darkness. He looked up, startled, and she saw the tracks of tears on his cheeks, the raw vulnerability in his gray-blue eyes that he couldn't hide fast enough. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough. "I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't." She moved closer, noting how he'd instinctively started to wipe his face, trying to rebuild his composed mask. "Bad night?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Today would have been James's 6th birthday. I thought after all this time, it would get easier." Callie's heart clenched. Without hesitation, she moved to the stove and finished, making his tea, adding honey the way she'd learned he preferred it. Then she sat beside him close enough that their knees touched. "Tell me about his birthdays," she said gently. "The good ones." Silas was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then slowly, he began to speak. "The last one. He wanted a dinosaur party. Sarah went completely overboard, turned the whole backyard into Jurassic Park, complete with sound effects and hidden fossils for the kids to dig up." His voice grew softer, warmer with memory. "James wore this plastic paleontologist hat the entire day, insisted everyone call him Dr. James. He was so serious about it." "He sounds like he had your intensity," Callie observed, and was rewarded with a small, genuine smile. "Sarah always said he got my stubbornness and her joy." His expression grew distant again. "I keep thinking, our daughter. What will she get from us? What kind of parents will we?" He stopped abruptly, as if realizing what he'd said. "What kind of parents will we be?" Callie finished softly, the words hanging between them like a bridge neither had dared to cross before. "I didn't mean to assume, Silas." She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. "I've been thinking the same thing." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. They'd been dancing around it for weeks. The growing connection, the way they'd started moving through the house like a couple, the way she'd stopped making plans to leave after the birth. "I'm terrified," he whispered, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Of losing someone again, of not being enough, of failing her the way I failed them." "You didn't fail them," Callie said firmly. "Accidents aren't failure, Silas. They're just life being cruel and random." "How do you know?" His eyes searched hers. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've lived with that guilt too." The words came out quietly, painful. For 8 years, I've told myself that if I'd just called them that night, if I'd convinced them to stay home instead of driving to see me at college, maybe they'd still be alive. Callie, but Dr. Santos told me something during my last appointment. She said guilt is love with nowhere to go. We feel guilty because we love them so much we think we should have been able to save them. She squeezed his hand. But love doesn't make us omnipotent. It just makes us human. They sat in the quiet kitchen, hands joined, sharing the weight of their grief and the fragile hope of what might be possible together. I want to try, Silas said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Not just the contract, not just the baby. I want to try. Us. A real family. Callie felt tears slide down her cheeks. I want that too, but I don't know how to be someone who stays. And I don't know how to be someone who lets himself love again. He brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. But maybe we can learn together. What if we mess it up? What if I run or you pull away or we can't figure out how to be parents? Then we'll figure it out as we go, he said. And for the first time since she'd known him, his voice held no trace of the controlling businessman. Just a man willing to be vulnerable for the woman he was falling in love with. One day at a time. One moment at a time. As dawn began to lighten the kitchen windows, they sat together in comfortable silence, drinking tea and planning a future neither had thought possible. When Callie finally yawned, Silas walked her back to her room, his hand gentle on the small of her back. Thank you, he said at her doorway, for not letting me grieve alone tonight. Thank you for letting me in, she replied, then surprised them both by rising on her toes to kiss his cheek. Sweet dreams, Silas. As she settled back into bed, Callie realized that somewhere in that quiet kitchen conversation, they'd stopped being two broken people sharing a house and started being something else entirely. They'd started being a family. Every relationship faces a moment when pretty words must become real choices. Theirs came sooner than expected. I need you both to remain calm, Dr. Elena Santos said, but the tension in her usually warm voice made Callie's blood run cold. Callie's blood pressure has spiked dangerously, and there are signs of early preeclampsia. Callie gripped the examination table, her green-gray eyes wide with fear. At 20 weeks, their daughter was viable but vulnerable, too early for safety, too late for anything but hope and medical intervention. Silas had gone completely still beside her, his hand frozen where it had been gently stroking her arm. She could see him struggling between the businessman who controlled everything and the man who was learning that some things couldn't be managed or fixed with money and influence. What does that mean? Callie asked, her Texas accent thick with anxiety. For the baby? It means bed rest, complete bed rest, and if it progresses… Dr. Santos paused, choosing her words carefully. We may need to consider early delivery to protect you both. The room fell silent except for the sound of Silas's sharp intake of breath. Callie felt the familiar urge to run, to escape before the situation could hurt her more than she could bear. But when she looked at Silas, she saw her own terror, reflected in his gray-blue eyes. Whatever it takes, he said, his voice steady despite the fear she could read in every line of his body. Whatever she needs. Mr. Montgomery, Dr. Santos said gently, this isn't something that can be solved with the best doctors or the most expensive treatments. Sometimes our bodies just need time and rest and careful monitoring. Callie watched Silas process this, the idea that his considerable resources might not be enough to protect the people he loved. His hand moved to his beard, stroking it unconsciously as he wrestled with his own helplessness. How long? Callie asked quietly. Potentially until delivery. We'll monitor you weekly, but any sudden changes… Dr. Santos didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The drive home was silent, heavy with unspoken fears. Callie stared out the window at the familiar vineyards, wondering if this was how it would end, not with her running away, but with her body betraying them all when they'd finally found something worth fighting for. Talk to me, Silas said as they pulled into the estate's driveway. Tell me what you're thinking. I'm thinking this is my fault. The words came out broken, barely above a whisper. I'm thinking that I don't know how to do this, how to be still, how to just... Wait. Silas turned off the engine and shifted to face her fully. Callie, look at me. When she didn't, he gently cupped her chin, turning her face toward his. This is not your fault. This is not punishment for wanting happiness. This is just life being complicated. What if I lose her? The fear she'd been holding back spilled out. What if my body can't do this one thing right? Then we'll face it together, he said simply. But right now we're going to focus on taking care of you both. One day at a time, remember? Back at the house, Maria had already transformed Callie's room into a comfortable sick bay. Extra pillows, a small refrigerator stocked with approved snacks, books, and magazines within easy reach. The older woman's eyes were red-rimmed, and she fussed over Callie with the intensity of someone channeling worry into action. The doctors, they know what they're doing, mija, Maria said, plumping pillows for the third time. And El Señor, he will take good care of you. But as the days passed, Callie began to understand what Dr. Santos had meant about things that couldn't be controlled or bought. Silas was trying his best, but his way of showing love was through action, through solving problems and providing solutions. Bed rest required a different kind of care, patience, presence, the ability to sit with uncertainty. On the fourth day, she woke to find him pacing their bedroom at dawn, his phone pressed to his ear as he spoke in clipped, urgent tones to someone about moving meetings, rearranging schedules, finding the best specialist money could buy. Silas, she called softly when he ended the call. He turned and she saw the exhaustion in his face. The way his usually perfect appearance had begun to fray around the edges. His beard was less precisely trimmed, his hair showed evidence of nervous fingers, and his clothes looked like he'd slept in them. How are you feeling? Do you need anything? I can call Dr. Santos or we can... Silas. She patted the bed beside her. Come here. He perched on the edge of the mattress, but she could see the restless energy still coursing through him. The need to do something, anything, to fix what felt broken. This is killing you, she observed gently. I can't lose you, he said, the words rushing out like a confession. I can't lose either of you, and I don't know how to help, how to make this better. Everything I'm good at, everything I know how to do, none of it matters here. Callie reached for his hand, noting how his fingers trembled slightly in hers. What if helping isn't about doing? What if it's just about being here? I don't know how to just be here. I've spent my whole adult life believing that if I worked hard enough, planned well enough, I could prevent bad things from happening. His voice cracked. But I couldn't save them, and I can't save you. And I feel like I'm drowning. Then drown with me, she said simply. Stop trying to fix this and just be scared with me. Be hopeful with me. Be present with me. Something shifted in his expression. A letting go of the control he'd been desperately trying to maintain. He kicked off his shoes and lay down beside her carefully, gently, until they were facing each other on the bed. I love you, he said, the words simple and devastating. I know it's complicated and the timing is terrible and we have no idea what's going to happen. But I love you, Callie. Not just because of the baby, not just because you need taking care of. I love you. Tears slid down her cheeks. I love you too, and I'm terrified. Good, he said, pulling her closer until she was tucked against his chest. That means this matters. They lay together in the growing daylight, not talking, not planning, not trying to solve anything, just breathing together, feeling their daughter move between them, existing in the precarious space between fear and hope. For the first time since the diagnosis, Callie felt something like peace. Not because the danger had passed, but because she wasn't facing it alone. Sometimes love isn't about holding on. Sometimes it's about having the courage to let go. At 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in late November, Callie woke to a pain that felt like her body was tearing apart. The sharp, stabbing sensation in her abdomen, was unlike anything she'd experienced, and when she tried to sit up, the world spun violently around her. "Silas," she gasped, reaching for him in the darkness. But her voice came out as barely a whisper, lost in the sound of rain against the windows. Silas lay beside her, finally getting the deep sleep he'd been missing for weeks of worry. She didn't want to wake him. Not until she was sure something was really wrong. Another wave of pain hit, stronger this time, and Callie felt warm wetness between her legs. When she managed to turn on the bedside lamp with shaking hands, the sight of blood on the sheets made her heart stop. "Silas." This time her voice carried, sharp with panic and pain. He woke instantly, the way he'd learned to do over the past month of vigilant nights. One look at her face, at the blood, and he was reaching for his phone while simultaneously pulling on clothes. "Dr. Santos," he said the moment the call connected, his voice steady despite the terror in his eyes. "We need to get to the hospital. Now." The emergency room was a blur of bright lights and urgent voices. Callie found herself on a gurney, Silas's hand gripping hers as they rushed through corridors that smelled of disinfectant and fear. At 24 weeks, their daughter was still dangerously early, but the monitors showed she was fighting, her heartbeat strong and defiant. "Placental abruption," Dr. Santos explained tersely as the medical team prepared for emergency surgery. "We need to deliver now, or we could lose them both." The words hit Silas like physical blows. Callie watched his face cycle through emotions, fear, helplessness, and something that looked like preparation for loss. She'd seen that expression once before, in old photographs of her father the day her grandmother died. The look of someone bracing for the worst while praying for a miracle. "Silas," she whispered, tugging his hand closer. "Look at me." His gray-blue eyes focused on hers, and she saw the tears he was trying not to shed. "Whatever happens," she said, her voice stronger than she felt, "this isn't your fault. You didn't fail us, you loved us, and that matters, that's everything. Don't talk like this is goodbye," he said fiercely. "Don't you dare give up on us now." "I'm not giving up. I'm just making sure you know." Another contraction hit Stealing, her breath. "I love you, Silas Montgomery. I love the way you take care of people, the way you see good in broken things. I love how you learn to just be present instead of trying to fix everything." They were wheeling her toward surgery now, and Silas had to let go of her hand. She watched him standing in the hallway, looking lost and powerless in his rumpled clothes and 3-day beard stubble, and her heart broke for him. The surgery felt both eternal and instantaneous. Callie drifted in and out of consciousness, but she could hear voices, Dr. Santos giving calm instructions, other medical staff discussing blood pressure and oxygen levels, and once faintly, the sound of a baby crying. When she fully woke, the first thing she saw was Silas slumped in a chair beside her bed. He looked like he'd aged years in a matter of hours, his hair disheveled, his expensive shirt wrinkled and stained with what might have been tears or coffee or both. "Hey," she whispered, her voice hoarse. His head snapped up, and the relief that flooded his features was almost painful to witness. "Hey yourself," he said, immediately moving to take her hand. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck." "The baby?" She's..." His voice cracked. "She's beautiful, Callie. Tiny but fierce. 3 pounds, 2 ounces of pure determination, just like her mother." Tears slid down Callie's cheeks. "Can I see her?" "Dr. Santos says maybe later today when you're stronger. She's in the NICU, but she's breathing on her own and her vitals are stable." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. "She has your eyes. And my stubborn streak, apparently. The nurses say she's already showing attitude." "What did you name her?" Callie asked, then caught herself. "I mean, what do you want to name her?" "What do we want to name her?" Silas corrected gently, "and I was hoping, if you're okay with it, maybe Grace? Grace Elena Montgomery?" "Grace Elena," Callie repeated, tasting the name. "That's perfect." They sat in comfortable silence, both processing the fact that they'd made it through the storm. Their daughter was here early but alive, and they were a family in the most real, terrifying, wonderful way possible. Silas, Callie said eventually. When they were prepping me for surgery, I heard you on the phone with someone. Were you calling about custody arrangements? His face flushed red. I was calling my lawyer, yes, but not about custody. He looked embarrassed. I was changing my will, making sure that if something happened to me, you and Grace would be taken care of, that you'd have the house, the business, everything. You did that? In the middle of a medical emergency? I couldn't bear the thought of you facing this world alone with our daughter. I needed to know you'd both be safe no matter what. Callie stared at him, this man who showed love through protection and provision, even in his most terrified moments. I need to tell you something, she said slowly. About the contract. About after. Silas went very still. Okay. I'm not leaving. The words came out clear and certain. I'm not taking the money and disappearing. I'm staying, Silas. I'm staying. Because I love you and I love our daughter and I want to build something real with you. Are you sure? You don't have to decide now while you're... I've been decided for weeks. I just didn't have the courage to say it. She squeezed his hand. I want morning coffee in our kitchen and arguments about whose turn it is to change. Diapers and family dinners where Grace tells us about her day. I want ordinary, beautiful, complicated life with you. When he kissed her this time, it wasn't the careful, respectful kisses they'd shared before. It was the kiss of a man claiming his future, of a woman choosing to stay, of two people who'd been through fire and decided they wanted to build something together from the ashes. 3 months later, Callie finally understood the difference between a house and a home. The NICU had been their second home for 12 weeks, a sterile world of beeping monitors, scheduled feedings, and cautious hope. But today, as she buckled Grace Elena into her car seat for the first time, Callie felt like she was finally bringing her daughter to the place where their real life would begin. Ready? Silas asked, his voice tight with emotion as he adjusted the rearview mirror for the 100th time. His beard was perfectly trimmed again, his clothes immaculate, but Callie could see the nervous tremor in his hands as he gripped the steering wheel. She's been ready for weeks, Callie replied, stroking Grace's tiny hand through the car seat. At 5 pounds, 3 ounces, their daughter was still small but mighty, a fighter who'd defied every prediction and timeline the doctors had given them. We're the ones who are terrified. The drive to Napa felt different than all those daily trips to the hospital. This time, they were bringing their daughter home, not to recover, not to visit, but to live, to build the family they'd stumbled into and chosen to keep. Maria was waiting on the front steps when they pulled up, tears streaming down her face as she watched Silas carefully lift Grace from the car seat. Dr. Elena Santos was there too, making a house call that was as much about friendship as medicine. Mira que preciosa, Maria whispered, touching Grace's tiny fist with reverent fingers. She's perfect, mija. Absolutely perfect. She gets more beautiful every day, Dr. Santos agreed, but her knowing eyes were on Callie and Silas, watching, the way they moved around each other with the practiced coordination of parents who'd spent 3 months learning to care for their child together. Inside, the house had been transformed. The guest room where Callie had first stayed was now a nursery, soft yellow walls with white furniture and a rocking chair positioned perfectly to catch the morning light. Photos lined the walls, ultrasound pictures next to hospital photos, Grace's first smile captured on Silas's phone, Callie sleeping in the uncomfortable NICU chair with Grace in her arms. When did you do all this? Callie asked, turning slowly to take it all in. The night you said you were staying, Silas admitted, settling Grace into her crib with the gentle confidence he'd developed during their hospital vigil. I wanted her to come home to something that was really ours. Ours. The word still gave Callie butterflies, even after months of using it. She'd grown up in a house full of ours, shared bedrooms and communal dinners and parents who belonged to each other completely. She'd thought that kind of belonging was lost to her forever. She's asleep, Silas whispered, stepping back from the crib with the reverent expression he wore whenever he looked at their daughter. Finally, Callie said with a soft laugh. I thought she'd never settle down. Too much excitement for one day. They stood together in the doorway, watching Grace sleep with the intensity of new parents who still couldn't quite believe this tiny person belonged to them. Silas's arm slipped around Callie's waist and she leaned into his solid warmth, feeling the rightness of it all the way to her bones. Do you remember, Silas said quietly, that first night you were here? When you looked so scared I thought you might run before morning. I wanted to, Callie admitted. I had 3 different escape routes planned before I went to sleep. And now? She turned in his arms, studying his face. The gray-blue eyes that had learned to see her clearly, the carefully groomed beard that softened when he smiled, the mouth that had learned to say I love you like a promise instead of a fear. Now I can't imagine being anywhere else, she said simply. This is home, Silas. Not just the house. This. Us. The life we're building together. When he kissed her, it was with the passion of a man who'd almost lost everything and the tenderness of someone who knew exactly how precious what they'd found really was. Behind them, Grace made a soft sound in her sleep, and they broke apart to check on her, moving in perfect synchronization. I have something for you, Silas said when they were sure Grace was settled. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, and Callie's heart stopped. Before you panic, he added with a slight smile, this isn't what you think it is. Not yet. He opened the box to reveal a delicate necklace, a tiny diamond pendant in the shape of a star. Silas, you told me once that your mother used to say that when someone you love dies, they become a star to watch over you. His voice was soft as he lifted the necklace from the box. I thought maybe Grace could have all of them watching. Over her, your family, Sarah and James, everyone we've loved. Tears spilled down Callie's cheeks as he fastened the chain around her neck. The pendant settled just above her heart, warm against her skin like a blessing. It's perfect, she whispered. Dr. Santos says Grace will probably sleep for a few hours, Silas said, pulling her closer. And Maria's making dinner, so we have time to just be together as a family. As a family, Callie repeated, and the words felt like coming home. Later, as they sat together on the couch with Grace sleeping peacefully in Callie's arms, Silas's hand resting on their daughter's tiny back, Callie thought about the woman who'd signed that contract 10 months ago. That woman had been running from love, convinced that staying meant losing herself. This woman, the one who'd learned to trust, to hope, to believe that some people were worth the risk of staying. She knew better. Love wasn't about losing yourself. It was about finding the parts of yourself you never knew existed, reflected back in someone else's eyes. What are you thinking about? Silas asked, noting her contemplative expression. Everything, she said honestly. How we got here, how close we came to missing this, how grateful I am that I was brave enough to stay. How grateful I am that you chose us, he corrected gently. Every day you choose us, that's what makes this real. As the sun set over the vineyard outside their windows, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Callie finally understood what home really meant. It wasn't a place you came from. It was a place you chose to build, one day at a time, with people who saw all your broken pieces and loved you anyway. And this beautiful, complicated, perfectly imperfect life they'd created together, this was home. Some love stories don't end with a wedding. They begin with the choice to stay, every single day. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows of the Napa Valley estate as Callie stood at the counter, her copper blonde hair now cut in a soft bob that framed her face, watching her 2-year-old daughter attempt to feed herself scrambled eggs with more enthusiasm than accuracy. "Mama, look!" Grace announced proudly, holding up a fork full of egg that somehow managed to stay balanced despite her unsteady grip. Her green-gray eyes, so much like her mother's, sparkled with the pure joy of small accomplishments. "I see, baby girl," Callie said, her Texas accent now soft and warm instead of defensive. "You're getting so good at that." Grace beamed, then promptly dropped the fork and clapped her egg-covered hands together, sending pieces flying across the high chair tray. Callie laughed, the kind of deep, genuine laughter that had taken her years to rediscover. "Need backup?" Silas asked, appearing in the doorway with his hair still damp from his morning shower. At 41, he moved with the confidence of a man who'd found his place in the world, his expensive suit replaced by weekend casual clothes that somehow looked just as good on him. "Always," Callie replied, standing on her toes to kiss him good morning. It was automatic now, this greeting, this acknowledgement that they belonged to each other. No contracts, no conditions, just the daily choice to love and be loved. "Daddy," Grace squealed, reaching sticky hands toward Silas. He didn't hesitate to lift her from the high chair, despite the inevitable damage to his shirt. "How's my best girl this morning?" he asked, settling her on his hip while reaching for paper towels to clean her face. The gesture was so natural, so practiced, that Callie felt her heart squeeze with familiar gratitude. "Dr. Santos called," Callie said, wiping down Grace's high chair. "She wants to know if we're coming to Diego's graduation party next month." "Of course we are," Silas replied immediately. "Elena's kids are practically Grace's cousins, and someone needs to make sure Diego actually makes it through his speech without forgetting what he wanted to say." Dr. Elena Santos had become more than their doctor over the years. She was family in the truest sense. Her children adored Grace, and Elena herself had found love again with a kind widowed teacher named Roberto. Their blended family gatherings were loud, chaotic, and exactly the kind of community Callie had never thought she'd have again. "Maria's making her famous tres leches cake for the party," Callie added, then paused at a soft knock on the kitchen door. "Buenos dias, familia," Maria called out, letting herself in with the ease of someone who'd earned the right to walk into any room in the house. Now in her mid-50s, she'd become more grandmother than housekeeper to Grace, and more mother figure than Callie had dared to hope for. "Abuela." Grace wiggled out of Silas's arms and toddled toward Maria, who scooped her up with practiced ease. "Mira que grande estás," Maria cooed, speaking to Grace in the mixture of Spanish and English that had become the soundtrack of their household. "Are you ready for our big adventure today?" Callie and Silas were taking a rare day trip to San Francisco, their first overnight away from Grace since she'd come home from the NICU. Maria had insisted, saying that parents needed time to remember they were also partners. "You sure you'll be okay?" Callie asked, though she knew the question was unnecessary. Maria had helped raise 6 children of her own, and could handle one determined toddler. "Mija, we'll be perfect, won't we, princesa?" Maria bounced Grace gently. "We'll make cookies and read stories and maybe call Abuelo Roberto to come help us in the garden." As Callie gathered their overnight bags, she caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back was almost unrecognizable from the scared, defensive person who'd signed a contract in a sterile conference room 3 years ago. This woman had soft eyes and laugh lines, wore her wedding ring like a promise she intended to keep, and moved through the world with the confidence of someone who knew she was loved. Yes, wedding ring. Silas had proposed on Grace's first birthday, not with grand gestures or expensive restaurants, but quietly, in their kitchen while Grace napped in her bouncy seat between them. He'd simply said, "I want to make this official," and presented her with a ring that was beautiful, but not ostentatious, elegant but practical, just like their love. "Ready?" Silas asked, appearing with their bags and car keys. "Almost." Callie knelt down to Grace's level. "Mama and Daddy will be back tomorrow, okay? You be good for Abuela Maria." "Bye-bye, Mama," Grace said solemnly, then brightened. "Cookies!" "Yes, cookies," Callie laughed, kissing her daughter's forehead. "But not too many." As they drove away from the estate, Callie watched it disappear in the side mirror and felt the familiar flutter of panic that sometimes still surfaced when she left for any length of time. But it passed quickly now, replaced by the certainty that home would be waiting when she returned. "Nervous?" Silas asked, reaching over to take her hand. "A little," she admitted. "It's silly, I know." "It's not silly." It's love. He brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her wedding ring. She'll be here when we get back, they both will. I know. And she did know, in the deep, unshakable way that came from years of proof. I never thought I'd have this much to lose again. And I never thought I'd be brave enough to risk loving this much again, Silas replied. But look at us. Look at us, Callie agreed, smiling as the familiar vineyards gave way to rolling hills and open highway. That evening, as they walked, hand in hand through San Francisco's Union Square, Callie thought about the journey that had brought them here. The scared woman who'd been running from connection, the grieving man who'd been afraid to hope, the tiny baby who'd fought her way into the world early and changed everything just by existing. What are you thinking about? Silas asked, stopping, to buy flowers from a street vendor, not because it was a special occasion, but because he'd learned that small gestures of love mattered just as much as grand ones. Everything, Callie said, accepting the simple bouquet of sunflowers with the same joy she'd felt receiving her engagement ring. How we got here, how different everything is from what I planned. Better or worse than what you planned. Callie looked at her husband, because that's what he was now, officially and completely, and felt the familiar rush of gratitude for the day she'd been brave enough to sign that contract. So much better, she said simply. Better than anything I ever dared to dream. Later that night, lying in their hotel bed with the city lights painting patterns on the ceiling, Silas traced lazy circles on Callie's bare shoulder. I have something to tell you, he said quietly. Good something or bad something? Good something. At least, I hope it's good. He paused, and she felt him take a deep breath. Elena thinks we should consider having another baby. Callie turned, in his arms, studying his face in the dim light. What do you think? I think, he said carefully, that I'd love to see Grace be a big sister. I think I'd love to go through a pregnancy with you from the beginning, without fear and contracts and uncertainty. I think I'd love to have a baby with my wife instead of a stranger. I'm not a stranger anymore. You haven't been a stranger since the moment you chose to stay. His hand found hers, their fingers interlacing automatically. But I want you to really think about it. No pressure, no rush, just possibility. Callie smiled, pressing closer to him in the darkness. I'll think about it, she promised. But for the record, I like the sound of giving Grace a little brother, or sister. Yeah? Yeah. She kissed him softly. I like the sound of our family growing, of choosing each other again and again. The next morning, they drove home to find Grace and Maria in the garden, both covered in dirt and giggling as they planted what appeared to be an entire flat of flowers in completely random locations. Mama, Daddy! Grace abandoned her tiny shovel and ran toward them on unsteady legs, her face bright with joy and mischief. Looks like you two had quite an adventure, Silas said, lifting Grace into his arms and not caring one bit that she was getting dirt all over his clean shirt. We planted happiness, Grace announced seriously, pointing at the chaotic but colorful garden bed. You planted happiness? Callie repeated, charmed. See, Maria confirmed, brushing soil off her hands with a satisfied smile. She said the flowers needed to be happy, so we planted them where they could see everything. The house, the vineyard, each other. Callie looked around at the scattered blooms, at her dirt-covered daughter, at her husband who was already planning how to properly space the flowers without hurting Grace's feelings, at Maria, who treated their family like her own most precious gift. That's perfect, she said, and meant it. That's exactly where happiness belongs. That evening, as they sat on the back patio watching Grace chase fireflies with the focused determination of a tiny scientist, Callie thought about the woman who'd driven up this driveway 3 years ago with nothing but a duffel bag and a heart full of fear. That woman could never have imagined this. The contentment of ordinary moments, the joy of watching someone you love discover the world, the peace of knowing that tomorrow would bring more of the same beautiful, complicated, perfectly imperfect. I've seen penny for your thoughts, Silas said, settling into the chair beside hers with 2 glasses of wine. Just thinking about how grateful I am, Callie replied, accepting her glass and watching Grace finally catch a firefly, her delighted laughter carrying across the garden. For all of it. The scared parts, the hard parts, the beautiful parts. Everything that brought us here. Even the contract, he teased gently. Especially the contract, she said firmly. Without it, I might never have been brave enough to stop running long enough to fall in love with you. As the stars began to appear overhead, Grace finally wore herself out and came climbing into Callie's lap, heavy with exhaustion and happiness. Silas reached over to stroke their daughter's hair, and Callie felt the completeness of the moment settle around them like a blessing. I love you, Grace mumbled sleepily, not specifying which parent she was talking to because at 2 years old, she understood instinctively that love in their family was infinite and shared. We love you too, baby girl, they said in unison, and Grace smiled against Callie's shoulder before drifting off to sleep. Later, as they carried their daughter inside and tucked her into her bed, Callie realized that this was what forever looked like, not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but the quiet choice to love and stay and build something beautiful together, one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time. And she couldn't wait to see what tomorrow would bring. I quoted Kabor's final message. What would happen if you stopped running from love and started running toward it instead? Sometimes the greatest adventure isn't finding something new, it's having the courage to stay and nurture what you've found. Your participation in this channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.